Call the special meeting of the Budget and Finance Committee and the Rules Committee to order. We have several special guests with us here today, and I'm going to be joined by the Chairman of the Rules Committee, Councilman Anthony Davis, today. For formalities, we will have a presentation from the Election Commission, and after their presentation, we will open the floor up to questions. We will recognize Budget and Finance and Rules Committee members first, and then after those committee members have had the opportunity to ask any questions, we'll open the floor up to other council members as well. So I'm going to turn the floor over to Mr. Tisch, and he has several members of the Election Commission with him, and I'll let him introduce them. Which mic are you going to be? Microphone? Yeah, if you could.
Thank you. I can't really see over there, but two of our commissioners, our chairman, Lynn Greer, is here, and Steve Abernathy, a commissioner, is here as well. And with me is Nicole Smith, a staffer. I put on, I don't know if I can work this mic and move around like I need to. Would it be all right if I talk loud enough for everybody to hear me? Okay, I want to try that.
I believe so.
I'm going to have to move around to answer some of your questions. I'll try and do everything I can from here. But when we get to the specific questions about the electronic poll books and the voting machines, I'll probably need to move around, and you all won't have a line of sight, so you may have to move over and look. In front of you, you have a spreadsheet that is a bunch of data and information that we gathered when we investigated the allegations that were made in the press about the electronic poll books. I've got that up on the screen, and what you are looking at is information about each of the polling places that had electronic poll books in them. There were 60 of them. I'm going to go across the column headings briefly so we'll know what we're talking about. District and precinct is obvious. Those are numerical designations. And then the name of the precinct. The House districts shows which state House district the people in that precinct vote for. And you will note that there are many, many splits. And a split, for those of you who are unfamiliar, is when some of the members of one precinct vote for one House member and other people living in that precinct vote for another House member. Same thing for the school board districts, which is the next column, and you can see the numerous splits. There are even some that have three-way splits. Those are difficult to keep track of, and we'll talk about that again in a moment. The next column you see are Republican ballots on the machines. Those would be the votes that we get off of the voting machines. The voting machine itself, I have one set up in the corner over there. The voting machines are where you actually touch that screen, cast your ballots, hit the vote button, and those are the numbers that we certify after each election. The next number are Republican applications issued. In the voting process, before you ever get to the voting machines, you must fill out an application for ballot. That's part of state law. And in a perfect world, we would always have Republican applications issued matching Republican ballots on the machines. The next column, same thing for Democratic ballots. We should have the same number of Democratic ballots on the machines as we have Democratic applications issued. Then we have, in this election in August, we had general ballots only, and some people did want to vote only the general ballot. So we have general only ballots on the voting machines, and then general applications issued. The next two columns would be the total ballots cast per machine, and then the total applications issued from our voter registration system. Again, we're only looking at election day, and we're only looking at the polls that had electronic poll books. The first thing that I want to call your attention to here is Precinct 5-1, Trinity Lane United Methodist Church. You will look over there under the Republican applications issued, and you will see the number 114. Skip 2 columns to the right and look at the number of Democratic applications issued, and you will see the number 0. This is our worst polling place. This is where we had the most number of errors, procedural errors. But back up 1 column to the left, and you will note that the Democratic ballots cast on the machines were 89. The Republican ballots cast on the machines were 22. How can this be? How can we have this disconnect? What this means is that each voter was incorrectly issued a Republican application for ballot, but when those voters got to the voting machine, they saw that ballot, said this is incorrect, and the machine operator changed their ballot on the machine to a Democratic ballot. What the machine operator failed to do was send them back to the poll book, and this would be the same procedure whether it was a paper poll book or an electronic poll book. They should send them back to that poll book to get the correct application so that their voter history would match the vote that they cast on the machine. It's the inner gray switch, the one closest to the inside. Gray switch. If you look at 7-3 Memorial Lutheran, you will see that 24 voters were issued Republican applications, but only 12 of those voters actually cast a Republican ballot. You will see that 161 Democratic applications were issued, but 173 Democratic ballots were cast. That tells us that of the 24 Republican applications that were issued, 12 of those voters, upon arriving at the voting machine, said, "This is not the ballot I want." And the machine operator changed that ballot, gave them the proper ballot, but failed to have that correction made at the poll books. Again, this happens occasionally in every primary. Voters will get in the voting booth after selecting a primary and say, wait a minute, this is not the one I want. We have a procedure. They come out of the machine. They go back to the poll books, whether it's paper or electronic. That correction is made at the poll books. Then they go back to the machine and cast their vote. These are the 3 polls where we have some numerical errors that we can easily see and that look to be significant. If you look at Luby Community Center, they issued 5 Republican applications for ballot. They voted 0 Republican ballots on the machines. They had 138 Democratic applications issued. They had 144 Democratic ballots voted on the machines. So the nature of the error that we had on Election Day was that when incorrect applications for ballot were issued, the voters told the machine operator about that error. The machine operator corrected that error, and in 57 of our 60 polling places that had electronic poll books, the machine operators dutifully sent those voters back to the electronic poll books and had the correct application for ballot issued. In 3 of our polling places out of 60, they did not do as good of a job. And indeed, at Trinity Lane United Methodist, although we have a 4-to-1 Democrat vote advantage, which is about what we would expect for that area, they did not make any corrections. You might see an anomaly down there at 9-3, Neely's Bend Middle. That happens to be my home precinct. The night before, a very dutiful janitor decided to lock those important voting machines in a closet so no one would tamper with them, and that janitor showed back up the next morning at 8 o'clock. Unfortunately, the polls opened at 7, and we had to vote 23 people on paper ballots. Those paper ballots were counted, and those votes were folded in with our provisional and change of address voters who voted at the Election Commission office on Election Day. This is the nature of the problems that we had on Election Day. There have been a number of reports in the media that people were voting the wrong ballot, didn't know what was going on, but the numbers really don't lie. And I will tell you that I thought I had a pretty good handle on what had occurred on Election Day. I've worked a number of elections before I ever became administrator. Thought I understood it. when the reports came out in the press, I said, well, gosh, I think I know what went on. It took us a pretty long time to put together this analysis. Once I put together the analysis, what it said to me was, well, you did know what went on. You pretty much had a handle on exactly what had happened. The people got the right ballots, but we have a voter history problem with about 143 potential problems with about 143 voters. And don't even know that it's a problem, but it could be with about 143. Questions. Let me show you a couple of other things. This screen is the old primary selection screen that it's a little bit difficult to see here, but I'll compare that with the new one. This one, it's hard to see, but Republican and General is highlighted. And in the lower left corner where it says voter signing on paper, issue application, that button is live, and you can, the precinct registrar, if they neglected to tap one of these screens, one of those ballots, Republican General, Democrat General, and just pressed voter signing on paper issue application, they could have issued an application for a Republican ballot. That is where we got a few of these errors. Now, the new screen looks like this. You will note that nothing is highlighted. You will note that the button in the lower left that must be pressed to move to the next screen is grayed out. It cannot be pressed. You cannot move forward until an active selection is made. So, yes, sir. Yes, sir, it does. And I have a set of these over here up and running on the table. If you'd like to see them, touch them, play with them, we'd welcome that.
We have a couple of council members in the queue to ask questions. Did you want to take questions? No, you're fine, Councilman.
Yes.
Councilman Mitchell.
Yeah, so let me get what you're saying. Are you saying that the machines were not defaulted last time? If someone went in there and didn't ask for either ballot, they got a general?
No, that's not correct, but I hate to be picky about nomenclature, but it becomes really important. For clarity, let's refer to these as electronic poll books, and let's refer to the voting machine as the machine, because confusion reigns when we talk about the machines. So I think your question is about the electronic poll books. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay. And with this screen, if the precinct registrar failed to ask the voter and did not tap with the stylus, either Republican General, Democrat General, or General, it would issue the application that is highlighted, and that is Republican at the top of that list.
So then the machine would give them a Republican ballot?
No, sir. Again, on nomenclature, the electronic poll book would issue them a piece of paper, which is an application for ballot, which the voter, and this is where I have to get up and move around a little bit. The voter then takes that application for ballot from here.
If you want to grab the mic right there, I'll turn it on for you.
They take the application for ballot from the electronic poll books or from the paper poll books, either one, depending on which one they're using, but we're talking about electronics here. They take that application for ballot and they present it to the voting machine operator. The voting machine operator then reads off of that application, and I believe I have that slide up there, whether they are voting a Republican ballot, a Democratic ballot, or a general ballot, and the voting machine operator sets that machine according to what is written on the application for ballot.
Okay, let's go a step farther on that machine right there. Let's say I come and I vote in November and I vote for president. I skip state senate. I vote in the state house race. I vote in the U.S. Senate race, but I've skipped the state Senate race. Is there any way in the world that machine can be programmed that if somebody undervotes like that it would automatically default to the highlighted party or the highlighted whatever? Is that possible? Not saying anybody would do it, but is it possible to program that machine to do that?
I do not think that is possible. We certainly don't know how to do that. And we have some ES&S representatives in the audience who manufacture the machine. They may be able to answer that question.
What, if you could come to the podium, I'd turn the mic on for you.
Thank you. Kathy Rogers with Election Systems and Software. What you're describing to me, I don't believe would be possible. We wouldn't have a customer who would ever ask for programming in that manner.
Well, we would never think this would default to one or the other either, but it did. So that's my concern. If that happened, then I truly have a concern of undervoting, since in this state, there is no traceable history, paper trail of voting. So if those things get programmed and just all of a sudden, any undervote, well, it's going to go to the highlighted party or the party that's on top of the ballot. We've got a concern with that, with voter integrity, election integrity in this state. And if this is possible, I think the scenario I just played out is quite possible as well. And, I would like, the Election Commission to get a third party other than the company that produces the machines to let us know if that's possible to program these machines in that manner.
Well, one comment I would make is that the machines are approved for use in the state. We've been using them since 2006. And if you undervote on this machine, when you try and cast your vote, it gives you a warning and says, wait, you didn't vote in some of the races. Would you like to go back and review your ballot and vote in those races that you didn't vote in? So you are alerted to go back and vote. Now, can we force everyone to vote in every election? No, we cannot. And certainly, we do know from looking at the numbers, people skip some of the elections.
Oh, and as you go down the ballot, there's a drop-off. But, I'm just concerned, all of a sudden, we've never had this before. The scenario I'm saying, I just want to know if that is possible. I've seen it where you said you've skipped an election, go back. But I skipped something on the ballot, please go back. But I'm just wondering, is it possible to program these in that manner where it doesn't say you missed something on the ballot, go back?
We don't know how to do that, don't want to know how to do that, wouldn't ever want to learn how to do that.
Well, somehow we figured out how to make it default to a certain primary, so I'm just want to make certain that this can't happen.
Let me make a correction to your statement. We did not figure out how to make it default to a certain primary.
But were you notified by some election workers in trainings that was going to occur?
We were not.
You were not?
No.
You're positive?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Councilman Mitchell. Council Lady Berry.
Thank you. And Albert, I'm over here. I appreciate you coming. Thank you. And I appreciate you all being here, too. Obviously, there have been lots of questions, and I'm going to have a couple now, and I think let others weigh in, and we can go from there. I want to go back to the electronic polling book, and I want to talk about this particular screen and the process that you described, because I think that some of the letters that have been issued are a little confusing. So maybe you can help me understand the process that was used to come up with this screen that then did default to the Republican ballot. So let me just what I've seen that you all have issued is that, in one of the letters that you all have shared with the vendor and the Election Commission has issued, you talk about the fact that you all are using the latest version of the software in the primary. And then you go on to say that the enhanced version of the software will not allow the poll workers to move forward until the political party is physically selected. And then later in that same letter, you talk about how Shelby County did not experience the same issue because there was no programming choice, but rather the fact that Shelby was using an enhanced version. So is there a different version? What did Shelby County get that we didn't get?
I would like to pass that to Kathy Rogers from ES&S, who I think can give a better answer to that than I can.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, I can help you with that question. First off, what you see, the original screen, the one before that Albert had up there, that particular software was something that was requested by another user. We have many, many Express Poll users across the country. One of our statewide users, who's been using the system for about 6 years now, had asked for us to set the screen up in that manner. Their poll workers are very accustomed to using it. It's a closed primary state. It's a little bit of a different environment for them. The version of software that Shelby County received was the latest and greatest version that we have. Shelby County is running a much older version of software.
Oh, okay, so I'm confused, because I thought you just said that Shelby County got the greatest, latest and greatest.
Davidson got the latest and greatest. Shelby's using a much older version of
Okay, so
software.
Shelby actually had the software that was making sure that no poll worker, or there was no default. The poll worker had to work through, I think, what
Correct.
you're showing me here, but we
Correct.
didn't have that.
You did not have that.
So the enhanced software version is to get rid of that.
Correct. Davidson County asked us to change the screen so it appears differently to poll workers in the future, which is what you see here. We will change that. We already have made that change. We'll be installing it on the poll books here. So in the future, the poll worker will be prompted. Not only will that button be grayed out, they won't be able to move forward until they physically select the correct party, but also there'll be new language on the screen, and that text box with instructions, a clear language that tells the poll worker exactly what actions to take on that particular screen. So again,
This is not going to be our problem, but for other folks who are going to use this software, the software that you all are recommending, though, it sounds like the new and best version doesn't do this. In fact, the old version is what ensures that a poll worker has to move through the system.
well, first of all, let me say, we have many, many different versions of software. We have a lot of different users of this particular product. Some are open primary, some are closed primary. Some actually use the unit to burn a voter access card and then take it over to the touchscreen unit and activate the unit. That's the way Shelby County operates. We have other users who operate in that way too. So their software automatically is a little different than Davidson, because Davidson County doesn't use this to activate any type of voter access card. Then we've got different states who have different requirements, different laws, which means their software might be a little different as well. The baseline software that Davidson County received was the latest and greatest. It had the latest security enhancements, 2D barcode capability, a number of synchronization improvements and former versions of software. This particular screen was something that, quite honestly, we didn't realize. We didn't know that poll workers would have difficulty with it. We'd see that, obviously. Now it's like a no-brainer. We know that we can improve that screen going forward by putting that fail-safe step in there in the future, and we already have done that. Davidson was very good about coming and giving us feedback, telling us that this was needed, so we have moved forward. One more point I want to make. The reason the Republicans were on top and then the Democrats is because that's the order of the ballot, of course, in the state of Tennessee. So when it was programmed in our offices, we programmed it in that manner. I've been using an analogy to try to explain this a little bit, and if you give me one moment, I'd like to share it with you. I think of it, if you think about software that you utilize or you touch in your everyday life, it's similar to when I go to my ATM machine. When I go to my ATM, it identifies who I am when I put my card in there. And then in my ATM, the first thing that comes up is an option to select $200. $200 is highlighted when I identify myself. I don't want $200. I only want $50. I have to move it off of that $200 to get down to the amount of money that I would like to take out of the machine. That's very similar to what occurred on Election Day. Again, can we improve that so that going forward it's a whole lot more intuitive to poll workers? Absolutely. We have no problem in doing that, and we're happy to do so. Could it have been better? Sure, it could have. But the version that you see that was used here was used by states, been using them a very long time. They were trying to reduce the number of touches, reduce the number of steps for a poll worker, and we just didn't make the connection that for a new user, that's probably not a good thing. So
I just want to, and I thank you for that analogy, and I think at the end of my ATM experience, I always get a little piece of paper too, so that's always a nice thing. what I did want to just highlight, though, I want to make sure, because one of the fair or unfair allegations that has been leveled at our wonderful election commission is that somehow they programmed these to do this. But what I'm hearing you say is you all programmed them to do this.
Correct.
And it just happened that this is how the programming worked, and that's because somebody programmed it.
Sure.
Right, okay. So you guys didn't do this, and I think that's been something
correct.
that's been talked
They did
about, and I
not.
want to be really clear about that.
Davidson County did not request it to be in this way. Matter
Okay.
of fact, they've asked for it to not be this way.
Okay, I thank you. I think that's really important, because as we talk about the integrity of the elections, we want to have faith that these guys are doing what they need to do. That's my first question. I'll let somebody else come in.
Thank you, Councilor Berry. Councilman Taggart?
I'm impressed, Kathy, because my ATM asked me if I want $2 instead of just different lifestyles, I guess. So just to make absolutely clear, the Davidson County Election Commission had no control over this default option in the electronic poll books.
At the point in which Davidson County received this, it was too late to make any particular changes at that point. So, no, it was within our offices, the software was created this way, and it was programmed this way.
Okay. And then, Albert, to make sure, because we are talking about two different machines, the poll books and the voting. So even if it defaulted to the wrong option, that doesn't force me, when I get to the voting machine, to follow that primary. There's still a mechanism to correct that, and that correction should have been to re-enter it through the poll books rather than to go ahead and just key something different into the voting machine.
That's correct. And what we have found, and what the highlighted areas on the spreadsheet show, is that those corrections were made at the voting machine, but we had 3 precincts where they did not get all of those corrections made. They did not send them diligently back to the electronic poll books to get their voter history to reflect the actual ballot cast on the voting machine.
So if I look at Gower School, where a significant number of ballots were cast, and the debits equal the credits at 35-1 all the way across the line.
Yes.
So that doesn't mean that mistakes were not made. It means that if a mistake was made and caught, it was corrected in the correct procedure.
I can almost guarantee you that somewhere along the line during that day, someone at Gower School said, wait a minute, this is not the ballot I want, because it happens in every primary, and they were properly sent back to that electronic poll book. That change was made, and they went back over there, and that's why the numbers line up nicely.
All right, so at the risk of jabbing my very good friend, the sheriff, how many Darren Halls have we identified in this process?
I know of 2 voters, I'm personally aware of 2 voters who, after casting a ballot, then said,
I didn't get to vote for somebody I wanted to.
That's not the one I wanted to vote for. I know of 2 of those.
But that had to be caught before you hit that final record the vote at the voting machine.
It would be important if you have, yes, it would be important if you have any question about the ballot in front of you that you raise your hand and tell the voting machine operator, I'm not sure this is right, can you help me out?
Okay. And I may be getting ahead of myself then. So the issue about electronic poll books in the November election, the problem occurred because it was a primary election and not a general election.
That's correct. The problem could not occur in a general, even with the older programming.
But the commission has voted, because of this issue and the uncertainty, that it's better to use the electronic polling books as a backup or an information source rather than an official login source. We're going to go back to the old days where I sign the book and do all that stuff.
You are going to fill out your application by hand. You're going to write out your address, write out your name. You're going to sign your name twice. We're going to turn the poll book around to have you sign it. We're going to turn it back around. We're going to make some marks. It's going to be a 3-step process, and then we'll send you over to the voting machine.
In general terms, turnaround time per voter at the sign-in procedure with the old procedure or the way that we're going to vote in November versus what the poll book procedure would have been?
Turnaround time's about half with the electronic poll books.
Okay. So in an election that we are expecting 70+% if historical figures are correct, it's our presidential election's our biggest election, as opposed to our 7% turnout for clerks and sheriff's elections and whatnot. We're looking at longer lines and more time, but the commission, and I don't want to speak for the commissioners, we've got two that can speak for themselves. The majority of the commissioners thought that the integrity of the process and the familiarity and the need to train our election officials better, we could be better served by doing the old method.
I'm not sure if you've included all the factors. There was a very strong recommendation from the state coordinator of elections not to move forward after the initial allegations came out.
Okay.
And that played heavily with the commissioner's decision. I know that because of the discussions they had at the table.
All right. How many poll books do you have?
Electronic?
Yeah, electronic poll books.
440.
And we've paid for all of those?
We have not paid for all of those.
But we're using all of those.
We have used, what was the number we deployed to the 60 polling places? Do you remember the total number we had in the 60? Probably about 180. 134? Sorry.
All right, so what function, if any, in the November election will these poll books have?
In order to continue to get some benefit for the voters and taxpayers of Davidson County, we will have one of these with each officer because they enable the officer to do a couple of things that cannot be done with paper poll books. One specifically, and this is very important after redistricting, many people come to the wrong polling place immediately after a redistricting. With the old system, you look to see if they're in your precinct, and if they're not, then you send them to the officer who either gets on the phone with the election commission or gets into a laptop and begins to search for them. With the electronic poll books, you can find that voter immediately, even if they're not supposed to vote in this precinct. We will still have one of those with the officer so they can redirect that, for lack of a better term, lost voter very quickly. The EPBs will print out a slip that lists the name and address of their proper polling place so we can redirect the lost voter very quickly. We'll also use them for finding information, registration information, about the change of address voter. That would be the voter who has moved but not updated their address with the election commission. They come into the polling place on election day. When we ask if they have moved, they say yes. That triggers a process we call change of address, where we have to get their old precinct information, find out where their residence is now, and they must vote at the precinct that's appropriate for their current residence. So we will use those EPBs to gather information. They will not be used in the voting process.
What percentage, or what's your feel for a redistricting? That's the case we're in now. We're coming out of a redistricting, so a redistricting first election versus a regular, what percentage, I mean, are we talking a significant number of people that are going to be at the wrong place, or?
I don't have a number, but anecdotally, I will tell you that I worked the first election after 2002 redistricting as an officer, redirecting people who came to the wrong polling place. Councilman Dominy is shaking his head because I believe he worked as an officer that same election. And we spent a significant portion of our day redirecting lost voters. I don't have a hard number for you.
But the ability to redirect, we need at least one of these at each precinct?
We'll have at least one. Some of the larger polling places will have two because they will have both an officer and a change of address official who is dedicated only to doing change of address.
Have we paid for enough books that only paid for electronic polling books will be fulfilling these needs?
We have not, Metro has not issued a check to ES&S for any of the poll books at this point in time. So when you ask me if we have paid for enough, the answer is we haven't paid for any of them, but we have them all.
There's some conversation here, Mr. Chair, if we could have the finance director or the vice or the deputy mayor or somebody to.
Rich, the mic is on.
Councilman, it's my understanding that the,
Is he on?
The contract's been entered into for all 440, is that right? Machines, and they've received, but the council's only authorized payment of $400,000, has only authorized $400,000. The second $400,000 is before you tonight and tomorrow night. And it's my understanding, though, that they have not been paid for any of the machines at this point in time.
Even the first batch?
That's my
I
understanding.
believe we just got the invoice from ES&S the end of last week.
So will we have enough money in the first batch, the cash in hand that's already been authorized by this body, to pay for the necessary machines at all the precincts? Or will we be short those machines in November?
I believe, and I will default to the finance director, I believe the initial payment will pay for 220, a sufficient amount to use them in the polling places as we plan to use them in November.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Tyre, Councilman Garrett. And before Councilman Garrett starts with his questions, I do want to note that we only have about 20 more minutes before the official Budget and Finance Committee meeting starts. So I'll try to limit council members to at least 2 questions, and then we'll come back around if we have enough time.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a simple question. Albert, the way this is set up, some people will look and see Republican at the top, and that's what it defaulted to. Is that set up by the State Election Commission as to how those are set up in all 95 counties? Where, might as well just say partisan situations, things change as time goes along. So is that set up by our election commission, or is it set up at the state level?
I believe it is a state law that the party that holds the majority, they come first on the list of
I think it is too. I think I remember being there. But just so that folks understand that if the situation had been flipped, it could have been a Democrat up there and it would have defaulted to the Democrat too.
That is correct.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilman Garrett. Councilman Maynard.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Chairman Davis. 2 questions. One, I want to say thank you for coming to the Minority Caucus. In that presentation, although there were only 2 or 3 Sheriff Hall situations within the Harold Love race versus Mary Pruitt, there were several people who only vote Democrat in primaries but voted Republican. And I believe that you looked at those numbers, and that was the only race that could have been impacted adversely by having the default to the Republican Party. Will you elaborate on that for just a brief, because I don't have a lot of time.
Okay.
But to insinuate that there was only 2 or 3 Sheriff Halls is not accurate. You have a lot of people who only vote Democrat, but they voted Republican, and I assume that a lot of those folks didn't have the courage that Sheriff Hall did to say and raise their hand and say, hey, this is the wrong ballot. They just voted whatever was put before them.
Well, to correct, Sheriff Hall did not raise his hand, and that was his error. Had he raised his hand, he would have been given the ballot.
Well, the other 2 who did.
Okay. Since I presented to the Minority Caucus, I have done further investigation, and the numbers are slightly different, and let me give them to you. What we did was we went and looked in the electronic poll book polls in House District 58 only, so we're limiting our look. How many voters did we have who had, in the last 10 primaries, always voted a Democratic ballot? In the last 10 primaries, they had never asked for a Republican or a general. In other words, these were voters who appeared to be voting Republican for the first time. We're looking to see, did that error you just described, did that really happen? Well, in House District 58 only, we came up with 113 voters who had no previous history in the last 10 primaries of voting Republican, but appeared to have by their application for ballot. This is why the distinction is important. Their voter history says they voted Republican. We know from our numbers.
Voter history voted Democrat.
The voter history says they voted Republican in the August election. I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Okay.
So we had 113 that appear to be first-time Republican voters, but we know from our numbers that 84 of them raised their hand, said this is not the ballot I want, and changed it. That left 29 voters in House District 58 who appear to be first-time Republican voters with a strong Democratic voting history. The margin of victory in House Race 58 was 58. with 29 voters, had every single one of those chosen to vote for the second place candidate in 58, the result would still be the same. Harold Love would still have won that race.
Okay.
Because
those numbers are different than what you presented at the minority caucus.
And let me explain why, and that's a very good point. At the minority caucus, we looked at the precincts in which House Race 58 was part of it. I asked my IT people to dig deeper and eliminate the splits to take only 58. In other words, where we have a 54-58 split, and if you look on your sheet at Bordeaux Library, there's a 54-58 split. McFerrin Park, a 51-58 split. I said, take out the splits, I want just 58, and that's why the numbers came down. If I may, there's another...
Well, my time is limited. I want to give other people...
I'm sorry.
Plus, I have a 3:30 meeting, and I asked the person I'm meeting with that they would bear with me as I asked the question. And my second comment is I want to be fair. I said a comment in front of in the minority caucus meeting, and now that the election commissioners are here, I want to be fair to them, that I believe that this incident in and of itself, the mistake made by the vendor, which defaulted to the Republican Party, probably in and of itself would not cause me a lot of heartburn. But coupled with the fact that we had election commissioners actually giving directly contributions to candidates that are in Davidson County, coupled that with this happening, then it gave me consternation. And I want to be fair in front of the election commissioners, not to just say it at the minority meeting, but to say it in front of the election commissioners, that I had a grave concern about this. I appreciate you explaining. I appreciate you talking about it because it makes me feel much better. But my consternation was some of my dear friends were given directly to other candidates that are in Davidson County. And that coupled with this mistake caused me heartburn. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Maynard. Councilor Allen.
I think this is a question for the vendor. It looks like in the future the problem is solved with this software change, but in the event that another surprise occurs, would state law allow general to be the top thing so that that's what it would default to as opposed to one party or the other? Is there a benefit to that?
I don't know that answer. I would have to ask.
Who do we ask?
State Coordinator of Elections would give us that answer.
And we could place general first. That would not be a problem.
If it's legal, they could certainly do the software.
Right.
Thank you, Councilor Allen. Councilman Dominique.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. Albert, what is do you have an estimate of the cost to enter the data while using the paper books, poll books, as opposed to electronic poll books?
I don't have it in front of me. I will tell you this, after the November election, it will probably take 10 of our staff 5 to 6 weeks to hand enter the data, the voter history data. They have to scan the barcode beside each voter's signature in the paper poll books. It takes about 5 to 6 weeks to do. That process with the electronic poll books takes 1 day. So think of 10 staffers, 6 weeks. I suspect the number is in the tens of thousands. I know it's in the tens of thousands. I don't have an accurate number.
Is there a chance you could get that before tomorrow?
I can get that for you. Bill Hyden would have that number, my finance guy.
Because while the incident occurred and it's troublesome that it occurred, the point is it can't occur in this November election, and it seems in order to appease a small group of folks, we're spending a whole lot of money and additional man hours to enter data that would be done in a day. I just want to find out how much that is. And my last question is, what is the possible impact, and I'll ask this to the chair, it may have to be answered by the vendor, what's the possible impact of us not approving the conclusion of the agreement where you've already purchased the machines that you have in hand?
I think that's a good question for the finance director.
Yes. Or Mr. Cooper, is that? If we don't pass the appropriation, what happens?
I'll give you a practical answer, and I'll let the legal director respond if he wants to. I think you have a choice. They'd either have to send them back or get in litigation potentially with the vendor.
Would the vendor care to answer what that might be, or would that be not want to get into that situation?
It would be a contractual issue. I mean, there is a contract, a binding contract. I'm Senior Vice President of Government Affairs. I like to make things work. If we had a contract issue, there'd be a lawyer standing beside me, and there's not a lawyer standing beside me because hopefully it's not a contract issue.
Well, I don't want it to be a contract issue. I want it to be resolved. I find it foolish that we've had to go through this so far, but the fact is we need to move forward. The machines save countless hours and countless dollars. And the errors were made by humans in the process, not by the machines. But I would hope we would pass it. If you give me the data as to the cost, and if legal could provide me with some sort of responses of what might occur should we not approve the funding to conclude the contract that we've agreed to, I would appreciate it if that could be done by tomorrow night. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilman Dominic. Councilman Hunt.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just got a couple. The previous speaker just said it was the issue or the problem was done by humans, not the machine. Well, what humans did it?
Well,
who's responsible for doing it?
Those would be a very few of our election day workers who did not follow proper procedure.
So the election day workers created all the problems. So
there was an opportunity for error created by the programming. I wish that opportunity for error had not been there, but since that opportunity for error was there, a very small number of our election day workers did make that error.
Yeah, I can understand that. And I understand those kind of issues going to occur when you got humans involved versus machines. But the fact is, you use a term, I noticed you used the term appear to on several questions and answers. So if it appears this way, what is the absolute fact that this is not going to happen again? What guarantees do the public have that this will not happen again?
Well, I think the best piece is this screen where none of the ballot selections are highlighted and the button to move forward is grayed out in the bottom left. In other words, until that selection is actively made by the election day worker, they cannot issue an application for ballot. So the voter must be asked, the voter must declare, as it says in state law, the voter must declare which primary they intend to vote in.
So it's a voter's responsibility to declare or the worker's responsibility to ask?
I don't think we can put it all on either one. The law says the voter must declare. Our poll officials are trained to ask every single time. If obviously they didn't do that in some of these occasions.
Right. Well, I appreciate you coming because I've had some concerns about it because I'm just one of these kind of person that's like a car or a machine, anything. When you have a mistake or an error in it, then how we know when the bugs are out of it? It happens in cars. It happens in any kind of piece of machinery. So I'm just having a problem to say, yes, we can guarantee the voters that this will never happen again. I'm having a problem. I don't see that yet to be able to say that. And in terms of the cost to me is not a factor if the information on these pads are incorrect and the voters don't get to vote the way they're supposed to get. So cost is not even an issue until we get all this stuff completely correct. And that's all I got to say.
Thank you, Councilman Hunt. Council Lady Langston.
Thank you. On the flip side of all of this conversation, Mr. Tisch, are there going to be any satellite sites open for early voting in this county?
Well, early voting sites, I hate to be picky about terminology, but we will have 12 early voting sites open for 2 weeks during early voting. Yes, ma'am, 12.
No additional, we're really going to have a huge election. And I understand that District 21 has been left out of that, but as an early voting site. No additional sites other than 12. with the major election coming up,
Well,
presidential election?
Can we name them? Let's see. There'll be, and commissioners, help me here, Bordeaux, Madison, Hermitage, all those are libraries, Edmondson Library, the downtown office, Bellevue Community Center, what was called, it's Living Word, Friendship Baptist. I'm missing.
Friendship Baptist, where is that located? Okay, all right. My question's been answered. Thank you.
Thank you,
sorry, I
Councilor
left out three
Langston. The next three in the queue are repeat council members asking additional questions. We have about 5 minutes, and then we'll have a brief intermission between this meeting and Budget and Finance. So I'm going to ask council members if you could try to keep your comments to 1 or 2 comments, please. Council Lady Berry.
Thank you, and I will not repeat the questions that I think have already been asked and answered. My question now is regarding the State Election Commission had recommended to you that you all send letters. Is that something that you all are moving forward with, and where are we in that process? That's my first question, then I have a follow-up.
We've been discussing that. It's actually the state coordinator as opposed to the state election commission.
I'm sorry, the state coordinator, Mr. Goins? Yeah, okay.
We have been in discussions with him and the Secretary of State, and that issue is not yet resolved.
And how is that going to get resolved? Is that a result of an action that the Election Commission will take? Thank you, Mr.
Coordinator Goins and I had a brief conversation recently. We're going to put off that decision until after the military ballots have to be out, which is the 22nd. So it will be next week before we sit down and talk about it. And that decision has not been reached. But those letters, if they go out from our office, won't go out until after the election. We don't have the time or the manpower.
Okay, so that's something that you all will decide in conjunction with the state coordinator. Okay, thank you. And if you would just let me ask you one more question. We had sent a letter a week or so ago when we were talking about the allocation issue that asked for an audit of this. And I think that you all have done a lot of great background work, but I side with Councilman Hunt in wanting to make sure that we have complete faith in the process. And I would, again, encourage, I think the audit committee meets next week to make a decision about that. I think having I'm sorry? Oh, Mr. Swan is actually here. Okay. And so we've asked Mr. Swan to do that. I think it would be good for the voters of Davidson County, the internal auditor, to give us greater confidence to identify any additional issues. I know that we've talked specifically about the poll books and the default, but there were also some other issues, I think, with scanners where they would scan the voter ID, and the voter ID would show a different person, or because, and again, and I know that those were maybe minimal, but again, it's an issue that we could highlight and fix so that we could make sure it doesn't happen again.
Could I make a brief correction?
Only if the chair lets you talk.
Okay. Scanning the voter ID will always bring up the correct voter. If a voter gives different information to the Department of Safety on their driver's license than they do on their voter ID, that is when the scanner would not pull up the exact right voter. And it does not issue an application, and it will not issue an application. But not the voter ID will always give you the correct information. That was the only correction I wanted to make.
All right. No, go ahead.
Okay, and because we have talked about paper being able to be spit out on lots of different things, I would highly suggest that we at some point look very seriously about having voting machines that actually issue a paper ballot. The technology is there. Diebold, I think, or the company that you talked about with my ATM does this. We could definitely get there, and I think you guys maybe have some money left over. We might be able to look into that.
Be expensive.
Okay, Councilman Mitchell.
Yeah, I think we had a councilman earlier ask, I'm going to save you some time, Mr. Tisch. He asked about what is the cost of all this. Well, the cost of the integrity of our elections is priceless, so that'll save you some time, so you won't have to come up with him a number. So I think our general public wants to know our elections are valid. And next, I just did a little search on, the company. What type of machine, the voting machine, is that?
It's called an iVotronic. Now, when you're talking about the voting machine, you're talking about where you actually cast.
Exactly, the iVotronic. I want to ask the corporation. I just see about 20 different occurrences in the state of Florida, perhaps, where in general elections, people would go to vote and it would skip elections. That page would not come up. So they would go from like president to governor, and then the United States Congress page would skip. I just want to know if they have corrected that and made sure that never happens anymore.
We have not had that problem in Nashville ever.
Well, we got about 20 different counties where I've been reading stories that that's happened in the past.
I'd have to sit down with you, see the articles that you're looking at, so that I could speak with detail and honesty to each one of those. I'm happy to do that. I will tell you that frequently there's an issue when, and there was one in one particular county that got a lot of visibility. When you do your ballot layout, it's critical that you lay your ballot out in such a way that voters see the screens and they see all of the races. And we have a lot of customers, the majority of them in Florida, who do their own ballot layout. One of the things that ES&S has done recently is we've worked with a company who does ballot design work to help on our customers and help with the software to be, again, more intuitive to better ballot design for that very reason. So I'd be happy to sit down with you and look at your articles, though, and answer your question specifically.
And you know, with that being said, I think, you know, we've placed a lot of this back at the General Assembly, and a lot of talk's been going on over the years about voter fraud. You know, well, we see other issues where problems in our election happen, and you know, a lot of these laws that we've passed, you know, that have made it harder for minorities and senior citizens to vote, you know, we've also got other stumbling blocks with the machines we're using and the technology we're using, and there's still not any verification of our elections, and I think that's a problem. You know, and as you said, you know, we need to do what we can to remove voter fraud at all levels of our election. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman. If we could get some written correspondence to the company, the vendor, I think that they're willing to get us some answers on some of the questions you had. Councilman Tigert?
Yeah, I don't know if this is for Kathy or for our two commissioners here. When I survey our election officers and ask them what makes voters uncomfortable, the number one complaint I hear is having to publicly announce which primary you want to vote in. Many people feel that that is a private decision. Is there software or machine or ability for, do you verbally have to declare that to someone, or can you not hand the machine or something to them and let them hit D, G, R?
The state law uses the term declare. It does not say verbally declare. You are correct that voters, well, I will tell you this, some voters announce it to the rooftops. Some voters don't wish to say. Is there a method that we can avoid that? Possibly. We could possibly do that, and we're going to have to look at that.
Well, I hear it not only from voters, but I also hear it from potential election employees who are uncomfortable being placed in that position and then have to argue with them why you have to select one of those choices or not. I'm just trying, now that we've opened the floor and talking about other things, it's a privilege to have two commissioners here with us today, and I really appreciate them spending their time with us, but I just wanted to throw that out as you know, if you talk to folks, that's what you hear repeatedly from folks on the front lines for you. I think Mr. Abernathy wants to respond.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Councilman Tigert. I've worked as a poll officer in several elections, and primaries are always tough. In fact, a lot of election day workers or poll workers that help us won't work in a primary for this very reason. One of the things that's real tough for us on the Election Commission is we work with our election day workers. We don't want them doing anything during the process to encourage a voter to vote Republican, Democrat, or independent. They have to be neutral. That's why they take an oath to have fair and impartial elections. So we ask, and that's what the law says, that the voter has to declare which party. We don't want those election day workers trying to encourage vote. I know one of the worst arguments I got with a voter one time when I was a poll officer was over this issue. She didn't want to declare whether she was Democrat or Republican, and I explained to her, without her doing that, I didn't have an ability to load the ballot that she wanted to vote on. And I said, it's a state law, so I had her sit down and she wrote a letter of complaint out. But that's what we're forced to do. And, you know, the voter has a responsibility to declare the party. We train the precinct registrars or the election day workers to ask the voter if they don't say, but not do anything to lean them one way or the other. Unfortunately, the voter didn't declare. Unfortunately, in that same situation, the election day worker didn't ask them and just hit print screen on the ballot. And you mentioned, Council Lady Berry, about the printout. One of the things that's kind of got left out of all this, when the precinct registrar hit the print screen button, it did print a piece of paper. And it did say Democrat, and it did DEM, and it did say REP, and the voter looked at it, and the voter signed it. It wasn't like it just got thrown on them without any awareness. And I think people need to remember that. And that's why, in many cases, when the voter took that piece of paper to the machine operator in training is trained to say, you know, Mr. Abernathy, I see you're voting in the Democratic primary. I'll load this on this machine. If the voter said, oh no, I'm voting a Republican, or vice versa, that's when it got changed. Just want to make sure that that's cleared up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councilman Garrett, do you have a quick comment or a question?
Yes. I'm sorry. Yes.
Let me get y'all. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's rare that you get an opportunity to talk to the Election Commission, but I will say after being here 4 decades of seeing through this and having this group not been here before, the one thing that it doesn't make it is if you're a Democrat or a Republican or an independent, and Lynn, we may have talked about this before, but see the way that machine is sitting over there right now? Is some of your polling places have it sitting just like it is right now, where the person's back is to everybody else. Those people don't like that. They want their backs to the wall. And this is not the first time I've sat in this chamber, but I was sitting over there when we got the machines and things. But I hear that more than I do what Councilman Tiger or anybody else has said about they want the backs to the wall. And that in your training, that's part of what needs to be done. And let me tell you, right now, that doesn't happen in all of your early voting sites, I know, because I voted in one of those. But the way that machine is sitting right there, right now, folks don't like that.
I understand, and we do train them to put the face to the wall so voters have their backs to the wall.
And some places may not be able to do that, and I understand out of 160, but let me assure you there are some that I think, unfortunately, I think those individuals, and it's terrible for me to say, but I think they just get a little lazy as the time goes by, as we have elections. This next election may be better, but the next one tends to get, and they just don't set them up the way they're either trained or it's easier to do it that way. But that's just it. But it's rare I get to have y'all in front of me, but we've been through this before. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Garrett. I'm going to give the final comment to Councilman Davis, who is co-hosting the meeting, Chair of the Rules Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wonderful job today. Thanks to the commissioners for coming and shedding so much light. I think you see how important it is to us, which in turn is important to the citizens of Nashville. And thanks to the committee members for joining us and other council members. And we'll adjourn briefly and then have budget and finance. Thank you.
Thank you.